Hey guys, what's going on? I'm back here with another investing video, particularly following the points from Philip Fisher's Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits. So we'll get right into it here. This particular video, of course, as you can probably see, is on profit margin analysis and looking at the present and the future. Um, let me skip the slide through here. Actually, it covers Fisher's points 5 and 6, which summarized are: does the company have a worthwhile profit margin? That addresses the present. And what is the company doing to maintain or improve profit margins? That has to do with the future. So there's a link here. This will be when this slideshow gets posted on the site, investsomemoney.com. Then you can follow that link or just search Morningstar for Philip Fisher's 15 points. You can look at it too to get a rundown of all of those. So anyhow, to kind of summarize here to begin with, for those who don't have a ton of time and maybe are unsure whether they want to watch the whole video, basically there are three margins to analyze. There's the gross margin, and you're depending on how much business experience and investment analysis experience you have. You're probably familiar with these, but anyhow, we'll go over them real quick. There's the gross margin, which is gross profit divided by revenue, operating margin, operating profit divided by revenue, and net margin, net profit divided by revenue. As you can see, they're all divided by revenue, and they're all expressed as a percentage of revenue. In other words, what percentage of revenue got carried to gross profit, to operating profit, to net profit. So those are the three margins. Nothing really new here. What I want to expound upon and kind of give my own twist on is the levers that can drive them. And specifically, oh, this was my note, so we can delete that. Huh. Because I did bring in my spreadsheets from my other site, spreadsheetsforbusiness.com. Anyhow, the levers that drive those margins, in particular, the degree of financial leverage and degree of operating leverage, and we'll cover those more in depth a little later on. But to summarize, the degree of financial leverage is kind of a gauge of uh, what the upside and or downside might be from the use of borrowed funds for the company, the effect on the net margin, and the degree of operating leverage is the effect on operating profit that the use of fixed cost versus variable costs would have. Um, that's kind of an aspect of things that I haven't seen discussed in the past. So, like I said, that's a summary of everything, and we'll get into it here. So, starting with the gross margin, um, like I said, gross profit is how you calculate or use what you use to calculate gross margin. And gross profit's revenue minus cost of goods sold, also known as cost of revenue. Depending on the company you're analyzing, they might use either of those two terms, but they're synonymous. And gross margin, of course, is gross profit divided by revenue. And like I said, the percentage of revenue carried to gross profit, and not to be confused with markup. That is sometimes done, but markup is the comparison of gross profit to cost of goods sold. So there's basically there's a relationship there. The higher the markup, the higher the gross profit, but they are not the same. A 50% markup, so in other words, selling something that costs you $1 for $1.50 is going to give you a 33% gross margin, 50 cents divided by $1.50, whereas it's a 50% markup, 50 cents divided by $1. So you can see there's a difference. So don't confuse the two. Um, And so, what are cost of goods sold slash cost of revenue? Well, these are more direct costs, and in particular, they're the kind of costs that will be significant when you're talking manufacturing, um, retail too. I suppose I'm a little biased. I always think of things in terms of manufacturing since I've worked for manufacturers most of my career. But so it's the direct costs in that go into a product or service and preparing it for delivery. Okay, these are also inventoriable costs. So a company will spend its money on these costs, materials, labor, machine costs, overhead, those sorts of things, if applicable. And those costs won't go directly to the income statement. Okay, they'll be attached to particular items, and they'll sit on the balance sheet in inventory until that particular inventory is sold. Then it will move to cost of goods sold slash cost of revenue. Okay, so it's a little bit of an accounting lesson there, maybe more than you signed up for, but just kind of understand what's included in those costs. It helps to know that. A little more about that. Um, well, what I did was, excuse me, I used my how to create a stock analysis spreadsheet as a example here. And this, you can download your own copy of this spreadsheet. Again, if you go to investsomemoney.com, look through the blog post or search for stock analysis spreadsheet, you should be able to find it. It's just a form you fill out to be able to download. It's free and everything. So check that out if you want to follow along or toy around with anything here. But so I just piggybacked on this post, which I had written about 6 months ago. As you might be able to tell by Tesla's current share price, it's about, I don't know, 3 times that, 4 times that now, depending on when you watch this. But anyhow, what I'd done here is basically projected out Tesla's income statement and balance sheet over the coming years to try to come up with a value for Tesla. And really, this is just an illustration. I'll say the same thing I said on that particular post. It's not me making a firm stand on Tesla's value. I just use them as an example company and to kind of illustrate the processes that I went through to arrive at a valuation. So don't hold my feet over the fire over whether Tesla performs as I, modeled it here. Okay, so anyhow, I piggybacked off of this, and you can see that it already had the uh, margin information here, and I just added this operating leverage uh, calculation down at the bottom there too. So in addition, on this video, you're going to see these financial leverage and operating leverage worksheets. I'm going to delete these once I'm done because it just detracts from the stock analysis spreadsheet. I'm only using it for the purposes of this video. If you're interested in learning more about those concepts, you can check out my other website, spreadsheetsforbusiness.com. Again, just search financial leverage, operating leverage. You'll find them. You can download the sheets, fill out the form. They're free. Yeah, I urge you to check it out. I think, excuse me, these are two under appreciated concepts for small businesses, certainly, and in the investment analysis world. So we'll get into that a little more as we go on here. But anyhow, using Tesla kind of as our example, like I mentioned, the cost of revenue is going to make up, and I should probably put that here, COGS. They call it cost of revenue, whatever. But so Tesla cost of revenue, cost of goods sold is going to be composed of, like I said previously, materials, labor, machine costs, overhead. Okay, so for example, materials, steel to make cars, plastic to make the cars, the batteries, the power of the cars, so on and so on. Every physical thing that gets put in there. Labor and machine costs are going to be things like receiving, uh, assembly costs. I assume there's at least some human element to making these vehicles, things like quality control, and then finally overhead, things like depreciation, indirect labor, your supervisors out on the shop floor, utilities, insurance, etc. Again, everything that goes into these vehicles, um, as they're from as they're made from the point that the materials are purchased up until the point that they get loaded on a truck, title gets transferred to someone else, and they get shipped. Okay, going to the next slide here, and we'll talk a second about operating margin. Okay, so operating profit is gross profit, which showed the calculation of earlier. And then subtracted from that is selling general and administrative expenses, also including research and development. So operating margin, as I mentioned, is operating profit divided by revenue. This is the percentage of revenue that's carried to operating profit. A 20% operating margin would mean 20 cents of every dollar in revenue is carried to operating profit after COGS and SG&A expenses are accounted for. So a couple things about SG&A expenses, particularly some things that might not be quite so intuitive. They are not inventory expenses. As a dollar is spent for an SG&A expense, it goes to the income statement. Okay, so it's expensed. All right, not capitalized is the to use the accounting phrasing there. For example, you've got sales expenses, paying salespeople, customer service people, marketing expenses, commercials, billboards, online advertising, etc., etc. Those expenses are SG&A. The accounting department is going to fall under SG&A. Research and development, as I mentioned, is going to fall under SG&A. So what's kind of important about that, and again, not to get too deep into the accounting side of things here, but research and development, for particular, is a considerable expense for Tesla. Obviously, the sort of company kind of prides themselves being cutting edge, so they commit a large percentage of their overall costs to research and development. And but it's tied to a particular product. Whether I don't follow Tesla that close, but the Model Y or whatever, I think that's one of their newest models, or a model on the horizon, or something like that, or that Cybertruck, or whatever it may be. You know, these are costs tied directly to a particular product. But in the case of in Tesla in particular, is they incur these research and development expenses. They're just for something that they hope will sell in the future. They're hammering potentially their current income statement. Okay, because these costs are being weighed against current cars that are being sold. All right, so they're so I guess that's the main point I want to make, is that while SG&A expenses are not usually directly tied to a specific product or service, in the case of like maybe marketing, because marketing can be kind of broad, um, maybe not, but accounting, the department expenses are spread over every product and service, executives, salaries, etc., spread over everything. But there are some sales, shipping, R&D, which might be easily tied to a specific product or service, and they don't go in inventory. They hit the bottom line right away, right as they're incurred. So and then, like I said, R&D is special in that this is also particularly true for, like, if you think of drug companies, which have a disproportionate, or well, I won't say disproportionate, just if which is an industry that has an unusually high amount of R&D expense. That all those expenses are being uh, are dragging down the current period's operating profit. When the revenues might be recognized for them some point in the future, maybe years, decades potentially. Who knows? So again, kind of a little bit of an accounting lesson. Sorry about that, but I think you do have to kind of have a general idea of what is included in these particular expenses, what they mean, how they behave, and that sort of thing in order to do an effective analysis. So after operating margin, of course, there is net margin. And that's your bottom line, your net profit, of course, which is operating profit minus interest. But it's that little plus minus after interest. That means might be interest earned, might be interest expensed. So that can depend. There can be some of both, as we'll see here on the Tesla worksheet, Tesla model. And then you can take out other income and expenses. Again, can be plus or minus also, and then anything else. Okay, because it's after that it's the bottom line, and there's nothing else taken from it. So net margin, as you would expect, is net profit divided by revenue. Excuse me, the percentage of revenue carried to net profit. Okay, and what that percentage is going to vary among different industries, different companies. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, which is also the case with operating profit. Uh, it'd be pretty rare to see a negative gross profit, but I'm sure it's happened. And then, like I said, just touch a little more on interest. Uh, there will be a net effective interest, the amount that was paid as a cost of borrowing, or the amount that was earned from cash and investments. And, typically when a company makes investments, typically, again, exceptions to every rule, but it's going to be in something short term, highly liquid. Okay, treasury, uh, T bills, commercial paper, things like that. Okay, so all that you probably uh, could learn elsewhere, but this is my spin on things. The cost accountant's spin on things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about two concepts here: degree of financial leverage, degree of operating leverage. Okay. And I'm not going to get super in depth because, again, you can go to spreadsheetsforbusiness.com. I've written posts on each, in depth post. I've got the example workbook where you can toy with numbers, see how they behave, learn more about them. But like the accounting stuff earlier, I just want to kind of touch on it to just to put the idea in your mind and how these sorts of things might affect the margins that we just talked about. So, degree of financial leverage. It is measured as operating profit divided by operating profit minus interest expense. Okay. And what does that tell you? Well, it's going to give you a ratio or a multiplier, how you want to look at it. For example, degree of financial leverage that's 4.2 is going to mean that a 10% change in operating profit will result in a 42% change in net profit. Positive. Okay. So if interest expense is enough to lower this denominator to make it 4.2, then that means that um, there's a considerable amount of leverage. A 4.2 is going to bump just a tiny 10% change in operating profit up to a 42% change in net profit. That's a huge jump in net profit. That's why it's leverage. A little I'm using air quotes here, a little bit of interest expense can translate into a big change in net profit if it's used appropriately. Okay, and this is all other things being equal. Right, you got to keep that in mind. This is a concept more than an out and out, you know, uh, hard and fast rule. I mean, it's true as you'll see on the worksheets here, but you know, it, a lot of other things change over the course of quarters and years with companies that you might analyze that you know they, it all change. The revenue will change, fixed costs will change despite their name, variable costs, blah blah blah. So don't, if you're using a ratio like this, don't uh, perplex yourself over why net profit didn't end up where you thought it should because you calculated the degree of financial leverage the month or the quarter before. It's like I said, it's a concept. It's all other things being equal. But again, we'll get into the examples here in a little bit. But the important thing to note too is, wow, that sounds great. If degree of financial leverage is going to rev up net profit that much, why not have an enormous amount of interest expense? Really get that DFL up there. And, if we can just sell a tiny bit more and bump, get it to 10. And if we can, uh, bump up operating profit by 10%, then a DFL of 10 is going to result in a 100% increase in net profit, will double net profit. Great. Okay, but the opposite's true. If it goes down, if operating profit goes down 10%, you're going to see a 42% reduction in net profit, a huge hit to net profit. Okay, so the pendulum swings both ways. It's all about how the borrowing is used, how effectively. Is it used to make investments that are going to increase operating profit? Yeah. So, like I said, it can be used effectively or not so effectively. So, let's go over this sheet here real quick. Make a little room here. Okay. So, degree of financial leverage, just to show you, we've got an example current income statement and forecasted income statement, and it'll just show what happens here. You see the degree of financial leverage is calculated at 1.28. Okay. Well, if you look here, after these new numbers are entered, we expect a 51.5% increase in operating profit. Real good. But we're also going to leverage it up by 1.28 so net income isn't going to increase by 51.5%. It's going to increase by 66% because 0.515, 51.5 times 1.28, the degree of financial leverage equals 0.66. This is my little checks and balances thing here. That's true. And yep, sure enough, a 66% increase. Let's say sales didn't end up as good. Let's say sales were just up a tiny bit, 998,000. Well, that's not enough. We're not effectively using those borrowed funds because the degree of financial leverage is still the same here on our current income statement, but only going up cost increase so much and only a tiny bump in revenue, sales, resulted in an operating profit that was down 85.1%. But we have that degree of financial leverage. So not only was net income down 85.1%, but it was leveraged as such 1.28 times that it ended up a negative 109.1%. So we went completely the opposite direction. Like I said, the little calculation checks out true. So that's just an example. Do one more real quick. Let's say we won't worry about costs and muddy the waters here. We borrowed that money and made an investment as such, an investment in marketing or something, and made 1.5 million in sales. Boom. 310.5% increase in operating profit. levered by 1.28 to 398%, almost 5 times the net profit. So there it is. That's leverage at work. It can be positive, it can be negative. Okay, we'll come back to this operating leverage sheet here because this is kind of a different animal, particularly as it relates to investment analysis. So typically, the way I would like to calculate degree of operating leverage is to take total contribution margin and divide it by operating profit. What's contribution margin? Well, you have to know the cost mix to know that. What's the cost mix? Cost mix is the mix of fixed and variable costs that a company has. And while public companies are required to disclose a lot of things, they're not required to disclose how much of their cost is fixed, how much is variable. Even if they did, that's still a pretty subjective thing. So, again, this is a concept, not a hard and fast rule. And, but that's how I like to calculate degree of operating leverage. But we're fortunate in that there is another way to estimate that, and that is to take the change in operating profit and divide it by the change in revenue. That's information that we have from the public companies we analyze, so we can still come up with a calculation. Again, check out Spreadsheets for Business for a little more information on that. So it's also expressed as a ratio multiplier, 4.2, you know the drill, 10% change, 42% change in, this should be operating profit. Yeah. Don't you love how I edit my slides on the fly here? Real polished, I know. Okay. So the opposite is also true with it. So it's interest is a fixed cost, okay? And that's its benefit and its danger, okay? So the same is true with any other fixed costs, okay? It's not going to change whether you sell 0 or you sell 1,000,000 units of something, okay? So it all depends. If you're using that fixed cost wisely, if you're investing it in your company well, if the company you're analyzing is investing it well, then that's great. More sales, more revenue, okay, higher operating profit because the cost is fixed. It's not going to scale up with that increase in units sold. All right. Back to the financial leverage thing. Interest isn't going to change if you sell 0, if you sell 1,000,000 units. All right. So that's its benefit. That's its detriment. Okay. So it's the same principle. It just kind of looks at a different part of the income statement. So here we are. Again, it's calculated here, and I don't know why that's false. That shouldn't be false. It might just be a rounding thing. It's a little persnickety, but anyhow, you'll see. I gotta tiny this down a little. I'm on the Chromebook, so I don't have much room here. Okay. So we've got our theoretical company here. Here's a current income statement. All right. And this is the degree of operating leverage. Now, this is calculated the way I said I prefer to do it, total contribution margin divided by operating profit. But, because that allows you to look forward, whereas the way we did it, we have to do it with a public company. This way kind of looks backwards. Okay. But it's the best we can do. So, again, just want to make you aware of the concept. So we got this here. They went from 914K in sales revenue to 1,000,000. Okay, 9.4% increase. But they've got a decent amount of fixed costs. Okay, and we're talking fixed COGS, fixed cost of revenue, and fixed SG&A expenses. Okay, they're both it's not just a COGS thing. There are also fixed SG&A expenses. A lot of salaries in SG&A. Okay, so a lot of fixed costs. Um, so yeah, keep that in mind too. So it's a 3.62 degree of operating leverage. Okay, so that's pretty high. So by bumping up sales, all other things being equal, can't emphasize that enough, but by increasing sales by 9.4%, okay, well, that is wrong. I think, I'm gonna have to edit this out, aren't I? Okay, I'm back and I figured out my issue here. Um, has to do with variable costs changing the same amount of sales. If they don't, your um, this calculation isn't going to be true. Again, it's not a realistic sort of thing. It's just a concept to think about how well a company might use its fixed cost. So, anyhow, as you can see, we got a 10% increase in sales. And since they're variable cost and they're supposed to track exactly with sales, even though that doesn't really happen in the real world, they increase by 10% also. Fixed costs um, aren't supposed to change. Again, they do, but if for this concept, they aren't. And yeah, so a 10% increase times 3.62 gives us operating profit increase at 36.2. So, again, that those fixed costs are resulting in higher sales theoretically, and the company's enjoying the benefits of that because it's leveraging up that small change in sales into a pretty significant change in operating profit. Okay, so that's the degree of operating leverage. Um, and that kind of covers all the topics, but let's look at the analysis sheet here. And I just want to point out that, again, these are calculated towards the bottom here below the margin stuff. You can I will try to remember to put a link to where you can download this in the description. I will try. If not, go to investthemoney.com and just search for it. Okay. So we did it with Tesla here, calculated their degree of financial leverage, and included that on there, including for the quarters that I forecasted out, had it increasing there, and the degree of operating leverage. Again, this is looking towards the past, so this is change in operating profit divided by change in revenue, but gives you an idea. If you plug a company's information in as to how much they are utilizing those fixed costs and the potential impact it might have on operating income and net income. Okay, so those are included on that spreadsheet now. So to kind of wrap it all up, a margin analysis is an analysis of the operational and financial business decisions that a company makes. Okay, the decisions on what they invest in large part, and investments, again, not in a traditional sense, not in the sense that like you're doing an investment analysis on a stock. Okay, this is investment in land, uh, equipment, people, um, whatever else. That is what a business is. It is a series of investments. Okay, money in, money out, time. Okay, so um, a margin analysis is kind of an analysis of those decisions that management makes. And if you've read or watched any of my other content on Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits, the book by Philip Fisher, you'll know that he's big on analyzing management. And it makes sense because, you know, it's, it's their decisions that affect everything, that will affect future performance, that will affect, the attractiveness of an investment. And I don't think enough attention is given to the particular people in these positions and their competency, and that, that's getting a little beyond the scope of. I could go off on a tangent there when it comes to management competency, but hopefully you get my point that this is ultimately people doing this, not some all-knowing, all-seeing, infallible uh, robot. It's people making decisions. So anyhow, what is a good margin? Maybe you've asked yourself over the course of this video, and unfortunately, the answer for that is it depends. Okay, it depends on a company's business model. All right. This is another post that I've had on investmentsandmoney.com, and is related to the common stocks and uncommon profits. Is, business models matter. There are more attractive business models than others, and the primary reason they're more attractive, particularly your subscription models or your consumable models, is that they flat out result in better margins. Okay, a better gross margin. You can't have a better operating margin without a better gross margin, and can't have a better net margin without a better operating margin. Okay, so the business model matters. All right, and so that's related, of course, to the industry. But some people are able to, in an industry that might have mediocre margins, possibly to come up with a business model that looks more like a subscription based or a consumable uh, business model than their competitors, that they are able to draw more on that, and they would probably realize better margins if they did something like that. Okay, so and then also what's good is going to, like a lot of this analysis, depend on the competition, slash the benchmarks. So the industry's typical um, margins, and what the competitors are doing, because that's your context. That's what gives it all meaning. Okay, so improving margins are good, of course, uh, but with an asterisk, I would say, because margins can go up, but is the risk the company's taking from the high fixed costs, the fixed COGS, the fixed um, SG&A costs, or the high fixed interest costs? Are they creating undue risk there? Is it a one-time thing? Is it going to be an ongoing thing? So keep that in mind as you look at the margins. And like I mentioned, it all comes back down to management. What confidence do you have in their investment acumen? Because this is their decisions are investment decisions. Again, in land, assets, people, R&D is an investment. Marketing is an investment. Everything, it's all an investment. So, you know, a company with high degrees of leverage can be fine if management's sharp and they make good investments of that nature. So, like I said, just keep that in mind as you go through your analysis, as you fill out either this model or something like it, whatever you do, keep it in the back of your mind. So that does wrap it up. I close every video talking a little bit about capitalist exploits, which is they have a free and a paid newsletter, okay, which can give you a starting point for ideas and companies to invest in, okay. I mean, because it's obviously a big pool of options out there, not options in the sense of derivatives, just options in terms of what to invest in, and it can be a little overwhelming on where to start. So that capitalist exploits can do that for you. Like I said, they have a free newsletter, a blog that's frequently updated, and they're well reviewed on Trustpilot. The newsletter is, and I'll put a link to them down in the description. That I will remember, I promise. And yeah, check them out. Like I said, if you need help coming with a starting point, and again, take advantage of the free advice there. So that is all I have. I usually end every video asking for likes and subscriptions, but not many people do that, so I won't bother. Anyhow, you can if you want. It's appreciated if you do. Uh, yeah, that is all I got. Appreciate you guys watching. Take care.